You're live.
Hey everyone, welcome to the 57th week of the Free Assange Vigil. My name is Steve Poikinen. I am joined this morning by my co-host Andrew Smith, Jazz Handrew, and our special guest Ray McGovern. Before we get to Ray, let me run through some numbers with you guys real quick. Today marks 3,532 days of illegal and arbitrary detention for Julian Assange, 485 days since the WikiLeaks publisher was trafficked from the Ecuadorian embassy after being sold to the United Kingdom for a $4.2 billion IMF loan. 30 days remain, 30 days until the second phase of Julian's show trial and rendition hearing. Today marks 1,163 days of incarceration for Reality Winner. On the positive side, this is the 147th day of freedom for Chelsea Manning, who's streaming on Twitch Thursday through Sunday from I believe 7 to 11 on the East Coast. I popped in to say hello and dropped off some love. I recommend that anyone who has supported Chelsea over the years do the same. And while we're on the subject of support, we do have a GoFundMe. We are crowdfunding once again to return to Washington, D.C. for all 3 weeks of these hearings. We have some very high-profile demonstrations and panels and events that we're working on. And yeah, it's 30 days. It's crunch time. We could really use the support. So if you are unable to donate, I totally get that, but please share the link, and we'll be making another thank you video for the people who've contributed so far later in this week, or later before our next Saturday show.
And as an exciting update with DC, Popular Resistance has gotten on board again to support us, and they're going to be working with us to get Veterans for Peace, Code Pink, and multiple other DC-based activist groups involved in promoting and joining these events that we're doing. So we really appreciate the help from those organizations, and we really look forward to seeing everybody out in DC. Later today, I will be posting a rough agenda. It'll have the addresses and dates for all of the events, just so people can kind of start making their plans around it as we're at this 30-day mark now. So everything's located mostly around the White House and surrounding streets. So if you're looking for housing, anything near the Capitol is a great location. But yeah, I look forward to seeing everybody there. One last thing before we pull Ray in here. We do have this week's call to action. We are repeating week 56. And that's because we're trying to get people to reach out to their local city councils. Tomorrow, or not tomorrow, but Monday is most likely the last time your city council is going to end up meeting before Julian's extraordinary rendition hearing takes place, or at least starts. So send emails to your city councils while you're sitting here watching the vigil. Go and find your city's website, pull up the council members in it, send them an email about Julian. On our website, that link that I put in chat for everyone, we have the motion that was passed by Melbourne City Council over in Australia. Just a lot of times providing a template like that will really help a city council draft their own piece of legislation in regards to it. And also an article that shows multiple city councils throughout Australia that are in support of Julian Assange right now, and what some of the different city council people have said. And that, when you give that to a city councilman, it actually allows them to see some perspective and evaluate what others in their position have chosen to do around this situation. So please send them an email. It should only take about 15 or 20 minutes to get those addresses together. But without any further ado, I'm very excited to have Ray McGovern joining us again today. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us. So before we get into the new piece that you put up on your website, I did want to talk a little bit about the recent court updates around Julian's situation. Most notably, the fact that he did finally get to appear in court via video link for this last round of not pretrial, but whatever they're called, hearings that happened about a week and a half, 2 weeks ago. And some interesting news came out where we found out that the information about the expanded indictment still hasn't been released to the UK yet, even though it's already been circulated through the US media and put on the Department of Justice's website. So I was just wondering what your thoughts were around that particular situation and that expanded indictment.
Andrew, I'm not a lawyer, and the ins and outs of this complicated situation are frankly beyond me. It's odd indeed that there's this new indictment that has not been shared with the British. But what games are being played, I just really can't figure that out. And I dare say Assange's lawyers are trying to figure that out right now. It doesn't look good for what's in store. One of the more recent revelations, of course, was that this judge, Baritza, has a record of, 96% of the appearances that came before her. The extradition request was granted. So, the odds are against her acting in a lawful judicial way. The question as to how long they want to keep Julian in that prison, that seems to be the big question. Are they waiting for him to get the virus? Are they hoping that this will all kind of be resolved by letting him die? I mean, that's pretty brutal, but the British penal system, as my Irish aunts and uncles can attest to, is pretty brutal. So we'll have to see what happens here. I admire you all for hanging in there, and the rest of us, and there is a real movement now. We'll see what happens next month, but the odds don't look good right now. We just have to keep believing and acting as though we have the odds, because we are more than they are.
I would say you could ask Bobby Sands about the British penal system, but that's going to be a really difficult question to ask. No, you're so right. And Baritza, I've been referring to her as the concierge of the U.S. State Department for a number of months now. Ever since we found out that those 5 members of the State Department walked into the courtroom during the case management hearing and huddled with the Crown prosecutor, who was relaying messages back and forth to Baritza. That 96% extradition rate is just what they were able to uncover, because they filed a Freedom of Information Act request. Mark Curtis did this, and they were stonewalled by the UK court system. And so they, did it digging on their own while filing an additional Freedom of Information request about a different judge in the same, UK court system. And they were immediately provided with a response and immediately provided with a statement saying, if you refine your request just a little bit, we'll be happy to give you all of this information. So it has zero to do with the UK system in terms of complying with the Freedom of Information request. It's specifically about this. Let's be, if it was the U.S. and it was, 100 years ago, we would call her a hanging judge.
Do we have a photo of her?
We have that one. We have that one that people have seen, which is like the only existing photo of her where she's smiling. And then I believe there's a video from like 25 years ago where she's basically singing Broadway.
She was just the Princess of Hearts. Now she looks very much like the Queen of Hearts, and that's why they're reluctant to display her photo. Off with his head.
It's actually terrifying how well Vanessa Baritza, and for that matter, Judge Abernathy, have been able to be hidden from the internet, to where there's almost no information about them out there. Particularly, disturbing is the fact that even when you try to find their like previous government histories and things like that, it's very obscure and hidden. So these are people that have been intentionally pushed out of public light, not in a good way, but so that way when they take these dark maniacal actions, that it's just people don't even really know who the person is that's leading this show trial.
Yeah, your neighbor's dogs don't have the ability to do their business on your doorstep if they don't know who you are and where you live.
That is an excellent analogy. I'm gonna remember that one. Yeah. I'm competing with a neighbor who, the minute it turned 9 o'clock this morning, it fired up a leaf blower. I'm hoping it doesn't bleed into the microphone here. People take this noise ordinance shit like really seriously. It'll be 9 o'clock in 2 seconds, and that thing's fired up. Not that I care that they're running a leaf blower. It's just, yeah, I don't have any environmental concerns over this or anything. It's loud and we're trying to do a show. And it's not like I can wander out every Saturday and be like, hey, could you put aside your yard maintenance until like noonish? Wait until it's the hottest part of the day and then go out and do this because I'm trying to do a show. Like, seems a little presumptuous on my part. Might as well muddle through as best we can. Real quick, while we're all here, Ray, I've been meaning to email you about this, but we are going to be in DC for 3 weeks, and we're currently looking for people who would be willing to donate, an hour or so of their time over the span of that 3 weeks to come up and speak at one of our events. Would you be able to find some time in your calendar over that period to maybe come up and deliver a statement or three?
When would this be?
We're going to be there from September 3rd is when we land. Our first event is September 5th, and our last event will be September 25th. So anytime between the 5th of September and the 25th of September.
Well, I'm sure I can rustle you up some of my colleagues. I'm not quite sure I can make the trip up there. My wife has a really damaged immune system. And so we're being really, really, really careful at our age to avoid any possibility of contracting the virus. So I'm sort of beached for a while, and that's okay. But I've got lots of colleagues up there who will be more eloquent than I and more knowledgeable.
Well, that's incredibly humble, but I'm not entirely buying all of that. At least the knowledgeable or humble part. I have a fairly high opinion of you, Mr. McGovern. I do. Well, not gonna lie.
But I did actually, if you could pull it up, Steve, I sent it over in the Riot chat. The article that Ray got published earlier today. I don't want to read the title because I'll try to butcher it, but it is what Scowcroft failed to do. So if you could, you're going to have to screen share that one because we didn't have it on the docket beforehand.
Give me a second and I'll get it pulled up.
Do you want to give us a little intro to this article before we dive into it, Ray?
Sure. Scowcroft was not the worst national security advisor. That's damning with faint praise. He had two disciples, two people that he kind of proctored. They were Condoleezza Rice and Stephen Hadley. Well, let's just put it this way. It would be damning with faint praise to say that Scowcroft was better than his protégés. He did some good things with the first George Bush, the opening to Moscow with the SALT I treaty, the opening to China, the sensible end, in a way at least, of the first Gulf War, and some other things that he kind of rose to the occasion about. Fall of the Soviet Union. He and Bush acted in a statesman-like manner at first. Actually, they followed through. They called Gorbachev right away and said, Mikhail, we're sorry about your problems. But just rest assured, we're not going to take advantage of the situation in Eastern Europe. We're not going to, as George H.W. Bush said, dance on the Berlin Wall. Let's get together. And within 3 weeks, Bush and Gorbachev did get together in Malta. They hammered out an understanding that would be fleshed out by Baker, Secretary Baker, the Secretary of State, and Shevardnadze, the Soviet foreign minister at the time, which provided that we would not take advantage of the fall of the Berlin Wall on the condition, on the condition that the Russians would pull out their troops from Eastern Europe, and of overall importance, would tolerate a reunited Germany. Wow. Reunited Germany? Did the Russians want that? Did anyone want that? Did I want that? No. I mean, the whole purpose of NATO, as the first Secretary General explicitly stated, was to keep the US in Europe, to keep the Soviet Union out of Europe, and keep the Germans down, divided. So this is a biggie, right? So how did Scowcroft and Baker persuade Shevardnadze and Gorbachev to buy this? Well, they made a promise. They said, look, we agree not to move NATO 1 inch closer to the Soviet Union if you buy, or if you accept a reunited Germany. Now, Gorbachev said, okay, let's do it. And as we well know, when Bill Clinton came in, he tore up that agreement because there was no paper to tear up. It was just a promise. Promises don't work with Bill Clinton. And NATO has since doubled in size, more than doubled in size. And guess where all those new countries are? To the east of Germany. In other words, lots more inches closer to the Soviet Union. So Shevardnadze and Gorbachev were on the receiving end of some real statesmanship on the part of James Baker, George H.W. Bush's Secretary of State, and his National Security Advisor, Scowcroft. But what happened later, of course, was a reneging on that promise. This is not made up. We have the documents, okay? Reneging on that promise. And therein stands an explanation of why the Russians are so nervous about Ukraine falling into this category of a NATO member. As most people realize, the Crimea is the host for Sevastopol, the major naval base that the Russians have had since Catherine the Great. It's their own all year round ice-free naval base. It's a great big base, okay? And as Putin said in a sort of jocular way, he said, I'm sure that those NATO sailors and airmen and army people are just wonderful guys. But we don't want to be in the position of having to visit their base in Sevastopol. We'd much rather have it the way it is now, where they're free to ask us if they can visit our base. And therein lies the story as to why Crimea was given the freedom to have a referendum, a plebiscite, decided to join the Soviet Union, Russia again. So all of this is history is very, very relevant. And the point, of course, is that Scowcroft played a major role in that. It was a reasonable, kind of a modest objective. And so far as their term was concerned, it was inching toward what George H.W. Bush called a peaceful and free Europe from Lisbon, Portugal, out to Vladivostok, out in the Soviet Far East, Russian Far East. So Scowcroft did a lot of good things. One thing he didn't do so well, and that's what I write my piece about. I thought that with all the encomia and all the flattering speeches about what a wonderful guy he was, that we needed some sense of balance here. because what he failed to do, what I would call his sin of omission, I think, in a sense, dwarfs all his accomplishments. What was that sin? Well, he knew darn well that his protege, Condoleezza Rice, had drunk the Kool-Aid. She was talking about cleaning up the world. She was talking about the need for a great power to destroy an evil dictator. She was really out of her gourd, and she shared this with Scowcroft and many of the others that worked in the George H.W. Bush administration at a dinner back in, what was it, September of 2002. So the chariot, or the war, the dogs were being unleashed on war, and they all knew it. Now, what did they do? Well, Scowcroft, who was uniquely positioned to blow the whistle on this, I wrote an op-ed. August 15th, an op-ed, in a Wall Street Journal, and his editors had the presence of mind to call it, "Don't invade or don't remove Saddam," okay? Oh, that's pretty blunt. 10 days later, James Baker had a similar op-ed in the New York Times. Well, isn't that great? That was, what, a half year before the war started, before Bush and Blair sent their troops into Iraq and what was clearly a war crime. So what did they do in the interim? Not much. And so what I criticize Scowcroft here is for this. He knew darn well what George Bush the Younger, let's call him W, what W had in mind. He knew the crazy people. We call them the crazies back in the day. And I'm talking 1975, 76. 76 is when I worked for the first Bush, when he was head of the CIA. And right down to when W took over, those crazies came back in. Now, his father kept them at bay. He put them in positions in the government where they couldn't do an awful lot of harm, Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense and all that kind of stuff. But here, W invites them in to be Secretary of Defense, National Security Advisor, Vice President. Oh my God, the crazies were in charge. Now, one of the little personal aspects here is simply this, that I had a good relationship with the first President Bush. I worked with him directly in 1976, his year at the CIA. And then when he came in as vice president, I briefed him every other morning. My colleague and I shared mornings every other morning, and we had a good relationship. We kept that relationship after he left town by letter and so forth. And when I saw what was going on, in other words, when I saw the crazies come in under his son, and I saw that they were preparing for a war that we veteran intelligence professionals for sanity said would inevitably lead to a catastrophe, I figured, well, do I risk my relationship with a former president? Yeah, you do. You risk everything to try to prevent something like this. So I wrote him and I said, look, you know about the crazies. You remember the crazies. Well, I'm afraid they have inordinate influence on your son. Could you do me a favor? Could you just speak to him privately about why it was that you kept them at arm's length and why he should be really, really careful about letting them talk him into a godforsaken war? Could you do that? And then I said, people like Richard Pearl are talking about using nukes against Iraq. For God's sake, this is really getting serious. And he wrote back, and this was kind of a disappointment. And I have that little note in the article. He said, Ray, I too thought, well, maybe the crazies would have initial reports suggested they might have influence over my son, but my son is standing up to them. I have great confidence in him. So not to worry, Ray. It'll all come out all right. Now, I think that was what, February 22nd or something like that, 2003. Of course, 2 months later, you had the outbreak of what the Nuremberg Tribunal called a war of aggression. And they defined that in very particular terms. They said to wage a war of aggression is to commit the supreme international crime, differing from other war crimes only insofar as it contains the accumulated evil of the whole. Okay? The supreme war crime, okay? Differing from other war crimes only in as much as it contains the accumulated evil of the whole. Accumulated evil, well, think torture, think kidnapping, think all the other grievous offenses that came as a result of the attack on Iraq. So I just thought that since Scowcroft is getting all these panegyrics and encomia and all kinds of praise, that if only to bring some of his associates and successors up short, okay? Say, okay, yeah, he did a lot of these things, and he's due respect for those things. But what he failed to do, what he could have done, what he knew was happening, he couldn't have prevented it by writing an op-ed. He knew that. So he wrote an op-ed, so did Baker. What else did they do? Now, here we are, February 15th, 2003. So what's that, about 5 weeks before the war? 30 million people are demonstrating across the world in, I think it was 800 cities, okay? Knowing that a war of aggression was something we should relegate to the past. You know, the Nuremberg Tribunal talked about that. We knew about World War II. Most people didn't know about the Treaty of Westphalia, which tried to make some sense out of after 30 years war. They decided, well, there's a better way to relate one country to the other, and that is not to attack them. And, it goes back, way back, for people to realize that this is not supposed to be tolerated by civilized people. So here we had 30 million people. Here's Scowcroft looking out his window, realizing, I think, that what he should do is get off his rear end, get out there and say, look, I wrote an op-ed 6 months ago. Nobody listened. Well, here's what's going to happen. Here's what's going to happen if these crazies, and I used the term advisedly, they were widely known as the crazies back in the day. If these crazies are allowed to prompt Cheney didn't need any prompting, prompt Bush into starting a godforsaken war. So people have criticized me. They say, well, Ray, it's not nice to say bad things about the dead. Huh?
Maybe the dead should have been asshole.
What was that?
Maybe the dead should have been asshole.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that. Say it more slowly.
We've got a hell of an echo.
Oh, okay.
There we go. I said maybe the dead shouldn't have been assholes.
Shouldn't have been what?
Assholes. War criminals, maniacs, murderers, corrupt, craven lunatics.
Yeah. Well, they were hyphenated, that's for sure. That's what I use for asshole. It's more a case of, as I was telling one of my colleagues today, you don't get a chance to write an article about Scowcroft, except when he dies, okay? You don't have a chance to admonish his successors and to give them pause. In other words, the next person who starts a war like that will say, oh my God, I'll have lots of praise for all the things I did, but some nasty hyphenated guy like McGovern is going to say nasty things and put a blot on my record, as Colin Powell famously said, because of his speech to the UN full of lies. I don't want a block on my record. Maybe I ought to stand up and do the right thing. So, the chances of that may be small, but here's the only chance I have. And so I spelled out that story, and I included the note from Bush Sr., and And I just wish that he had had the courage to speak out publicly. And failing that, I wish that Scowcroft and Baker and the others would have spoken out publicly, because there was a good chance that that might have made a difference. A lot of people knew that Cheney was lying through his teeth. There were hundreds within the intelligence community that knew that the intelligence had been corrupted, that as the head of the Senate Intelligence Committee put it, the intelligence used was uncorroborated, contradicted, or even non-existent, end quote. Now, what does non-existent intelligence look like? Okay. Nobody quit. Nobody sounded the alarm. There were only three from the Foreign Service, 3 Foreign Service officers, one in Athens, Brady Kiesling, one in Mongolia, Ann Wright, and one in Washington, John H. Brown. They quit. They quit on the spot, irrespective of their retirement benefits. John H. Brown told me, I got a call after I quit from the admin people. I said, boy, were you lucky? You quit just right after you qualified for retirement. He said, what? Yeah. He said, I didn't even think of retirement. I was just so angry and so driven to make a public spectacle of what's going on here. Oh, so I get a retirement too? I said, yeah. If you'd done it a week before, you wouldn't have. So this is what principle is. And the only principled people in that set of circumstances were 3 U.S. Foreign Service officers plus 2. Catherine Gunn, who worked for the NSA equivalent in London, who revealed a very damaging message that she got from NSA indicating the games they were playing at the UN, and a fellow named Andrew Wilkie, who was a top analyst in what they call ONA, Australia's equivalent to the CIA. He quit 8 days before the war, said, look, we've told the government what's going on here. It's all a sham. I can't stand it anymore. I quit. Now, Andrew Wilkie, he landed on his feet. He's an MP in the Australian Parliament. So you had 3 from the US, 2 from Commonwealth countries, Britain and Australia, but no one else. So maybe I'm trying to encourage people, look, it's time. When you want to speak out, do it in a timely way. And if you don't, well, some nasty fellow like me is going to write in your obit or insist that it be in your eulogy that you failed the big test.
So you talk about the crazies, the neoconservative faction that wants the wars and the profiteering that comes from them. Do you see the administration that we're living under now as having allowed crazies to be put in positions that maybe they shouldn't have been, to word that as politely as possible for you?
Well, I mean, I learned today that Elliot Abrams now has the portfolio for Iran. Now, Elliot Abrams is a convicted felon for lying.
One of the few people ever in U.S. history to be a convicted war criminal. Like, that's how bad Elliot Abrams is that he, among the whole cast of horribleness throughout modern U.S. history, is one of the only people to go down for actual war crimes.
Well, he and Weinberger, a couple of CIA officers, were all pardoned. Weinberger was the Secretary of Defense, by the way, under Ronald Reagan. They were all pardoned by George H.W. Bush before he went out of office.
And who was George H.W. Bush's Attorney General then, Ray?
Who was his Attorney General?
Yeah, the guy who kind of orchestrated and implemented the pardonings and cover-ups of the whole Iran-Contra mess.
Oh, I think his name was Barr, but I'm barred from saying the name.
I believe you're correct. Gentlemen, I have to step out early. I apologize for that, and I want to just let everyone in the chat know that I love you guys. And Ray, thank you very much. and I will be listening to the rest of the vigil in the car, but I have to take a sick kid to the doctor's office, so I have to bounce. But yeah, you guys have a wonderful day.
Okay, good luck on
I hope
that.
everything's okay, Steve.
Yep.
So there is one. We'll wrap up a little bit early today too, because CN Live does have an event going on right now in conjunction with Courage Foundation in support of Julian. But I did just want to touch on this one last piece here. And this is, I believe it's kind of related to one of the very first things you talked about here on the vigil with us, actually. And that is the Rich family essentially suing or subpoenaing or sending out cease and desists to different people and media organizations about publishing or talking about Seth Rich's potential involvement within the DNC leaks. And recently it came out that a judge calls for Julian Assange's testimony in a civil suit against Fox News over the Seth Rich article that they ran. So just to kind of go through the first little bit here, a U.S. federal judge has asked the UK to assist in facilitating the testimony of WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange in a civil suit against Fox News, brought by the parents of the slain DNC National Committee staffer Seth Rich. The U.S. magistrate, Judge Sarah Netburn, said in a filing on Wednesday that Assange's evidence cannot be secured except by intervention from the English courts, and that such intervention would serve to further the international interests of justice and judicial cooperation. At issue is a civil lawsuit brought by the parents of Rich, who worked in the DNC voter expansion division. Rich was shot and killed in July 2016 in Washington, D.C., in what police suspect to be a botched robbery. Conspiracy theorists following Rich's murder alleged that he had been involved in the hacking and subsequent leaking of DNC emails prior to death. The emails were published in part by WikiLeaks. After Rich's death, Fox News reported that he had contact with Assange prior to his death. The cable news network subsequently retracted the article, claiming that it had not been properly vetted prior to publication. The following year, Rich's parents brought a lawsuit against Fox News over the article, claiming the network had perpetuated intentional infliction of emotional distress against them. Fox in turn argued that reaction notwithstanding, the article was not a sham as alleged by the plaintiffs. So I was just wondering if you could, what your opinions are and your thoughts about the potential of having Julian questioned in this case. And then if you could, a little update around your situation with the Rich family.
Sure. Well, Andrew, this is as neuralgic an issue as I've seen in Washington in a very long time. It all hinges, and here's the little background that's really necessary. It all hinges on the theft of the DNC emails that was so damaging to Hillary Clinton and the DNC because they revealed in chapter and verse how she had stolen the nomination from Bernie Sanders back in 2016. It's all there, okay? Now, the question would be, how did WikiLeaks get those emails? Well, what the DNC and the Hillary campaign decided was to blame it on the Russians and distract attention, okay? So what happened when they were finally published on the 22nd of July, 2016? All the commentators were all revved up. What they said was, why did the Russians do this? The Russians. Why did the Russians hack the DNC and give these things to WikiLeaks to destroy Hillary Clinton? Why? Nobody. It was a magnificent diversion of attention. Nobody looked at the emails and what they told about how Bernie Sanders had been screwed out of the nomination. Nobody looked at that at all. So that's the the beginning of this thing. And as we in veteran professionals for sanity, veteran intelligence professionals for sanity, looked at this very closely, we could say, whoa, wait a second. The Russians hacked? Huh. I wonder why NSA doesn't have any evidence of that. NSA collects everything. Now, when Bill Binney, who is a former technical director of NSA, told me that NSA tracks or intercepts all our email messages and telephone calls, I said, yeah, right, Bill, come on. Millions and millions and billions. He said, look, Ray, I know, trust me, okay? They have it. If it goes across the internet, they have it. Oh, well, they didn't have anything on this. So ipso facto, Bill and others reasoned that there was no hack. And then there became some metadata that showed that it was copied off a computer onto a external storage device like a thumb drive at a rate that far exceeded the capability of the internet at that time. We're talking July now of 2016. So it had to be a leak. It had to be a thumb drive or some other kind of storage device on which it was the speed at which it was downloaded was exactly the speed that a thumb drive can tolerate. Okay, so it was a no-brainer. We reasoned that somebody had gone in there, somebody with access to the DNC had copied and the emails onto a thumb drive and put in their pocket and took a plane over to wherever WikiLeaks released this information. Now, it was sort of a no-brainer, but people didn't believe us. People said, no, it couldn't be that. Well, why couldn't it be that? Well, because if it was not a hack, and the last thing I'll mention in this connection is that everyone, including Bob Mueller and James Comey and all the muckety-mucks, as my Irish grandmother would call them, they all said that CrowdStrike, this super entity, what did Comey call it? A first-class entity had the information that this was a Russian hack. Well, what did CrowdStrike say when they were under oath? Sean Henry, who was the head of CrowdStrike, testified under oath to the House Intelligence Committee on the 5th of December, 2017. Now, we don't have any concrete evidence that the DNC emails were hacked by Russia or by anybody else. Now, we often get concrete indications, technical, showing that these things are hacked and exfiltrated and left. But in this case, we don't have any evidence of exfiltration, which means hack. That was the 5th of December, 2017.
The closest thing to evidence we actually have in the public light showing, and at least to my knowledge, anything relevant to Russia trying to interfere in our elections, aside from a couple Facebook ads and Google ads, was the information released by Reality Winner that showed that someone who may or may not be a state actor of Russia may or may not have attempted to hack into or send whale fishing attempts to hack into different voter databases throughout the country.
Spearfishing, Andrew, spearfishing.
Spearfishing, sorry. And that is why she's in jail right now, is because she revealed that information that I believe actually more embarrassed the intelligence community, because it showed that the majority of the information that they had about this Russian involvement was literally just speculation about who may or may not have tried to hack into voter databases with no recorded evidence of success to top it off. So it's a shame that we see Julian being prosecuted and then someone as brave as Reality get prosecuted because they tried to show evidence, or as I see it, the lack thereof, for this entire situation.
Yeah, those are good points, Andrew. Let me just finish up with this testimony by Sean Henry on the 5th of December, 2017. Do the arithmetic. What's today? Today's the 2020, I think, isn't it? Yeah, right. Okay. So that testimony was kept secret until 3 months ago. 3 months ago being May 7th, 2020. Now, none of my friends in New York know about this. Why? Simple. It's not been in the New York Times. It destroys the whole notion that anybody had any evidence, technical evidence or other, that the DNC emails were hacked by Russia or by anybody else. This is the outfit that the FBI let do the forensics, and the forensics showed there was no exfiltration. Okay, so that's big. Okay, now that's all kind of preface, and sorry to be so long-winded, but it sets the context. Okay, so if the Russians didn't hack, how did WikiLeaks get the DNC emails? Well, to copy those emails onto a thumb drive, you need to have access to the DNC server or computers. Well, wow. So, mean it came from inside the DNC? Oh my God. Or at least by somebody who had access. Who could that be? Here's where the neuralgia comes in. There is a prime candidate. His name is Seth Rich. And he's a candidate because he's the only one we know that had access and that was killed under very suspicious circumstances, and that Julian Assange himself called attention to and said he would give a reward. WikiLeaks would give a reward for the apprehension of anybody who had anything to do or any information on whoever it was that killed Seth Rich. So there's some circumstantial evidence, but it's anathema. If you mention that, you are ipso facto a conspiracy theorist, okay? And the Rich family and very well-heeled Democratic National Committee lawyers are suing everybody and his brother and sister who might even suggest that Seth Rich or his brother Aaron might have had some sort of role in all this. Now, how conspiracy-minded is this conspiracy theorist? Well, let me put it this way. There is sworn testimony in the courts now that the Riches were in touch with WikiLeaks. Okay, there are about 3 or 4 that I know of court cases going forward where NSA is being asked to release this information. As I say, they have it. They have it ipso. If, in the 2% possibility they don't have it, then GCHQ in London or one of the other Five Eye outfits has it, okay? So if they don't have it, what does that mean? Whoa, if they do have it, it means something else. So NSA is playing footsie here. It looks very much like the lawyers expect that NSA will be able to delay any accountability until after the coming election. So the courts are sort of flailing about. And here is Fox News, who's being sued by the Rich family for running an article that was pretty well vetted and which pinned the blame on Seth Rich. They're being sued. And so Fox says, well, there's one guy that knows. His name is Julian Assange. Let's make sure that we interview him. Or they could have added Ambassador Craig Murray, who also knows a lot about this. By the way, that would have occurred, I think, to Robert Mueller if he were still compos mentis. Why Robert Mueller pursued this very long investigation without so much as approaching Julian Assange or Craig Murray, well, that speaks volumes. In any case, some smart lawyers said, well, let's see what Julian Assange will permit himself to say this time. And again, this is lawyerly maneuvering. My guess is that Julian Assange will say, we don't speak about our sources, and that will neither help nor hinder those who are pressing this case in the federal courts. A codicil to this is simply that since Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity has been saying it was not a hack, it was a leak since December 12, 2016, we are being sued. All our technical people, and including me, are being sued by the Rich family and those fancy lawyers, and subpoenaed, not sued, I'm sorry, we're being subpoenaed. It's a difference. And the subpoenas call for all information that we talked about or shared or in any way having to do with whether it was a hack or a leak, and also all information that we ever said or wrote or thought about having to do with the Rich family. It's really pretty transparent. They're running scared because with the revelation, when the New York Times finally reveals 3 months after the fact that CrowdStrike has struck out, so to speak, then people are going to say, well, all right, that's well, how did WikiLeaks get those things? And the attention will turn to those who had access to the DNC emails. I don't know if it was Seth Rich, but I know that he's the only name that I know that has been mentioned in this connection by none other than Julian Assange, at least in a indirect admission that he knew about him and offered a reward. So it's all coming to a head, but the question is when. Now the wheels of justice grind exceedingly slow, right? And the lawyers are just happy as can be to keep getting lots of money for doing what they're doing. And so will they come to any kind of resolution on these things before the election? I don't know. I'm not a lawyer, but I suspect not. Where does that leave us? That leaves us with perhaps a new administration coming in, where all of this stuff will be kind of moot, okay? Really moot, like moot, mute and moot, and that's really sorrowful because this is a big deal. This is really important, and once it's acknowledged that nobody hacked those DNC emails. Now, did they hurt Hillary? Well, I imagine they did. I mean, they were factual. They were accurate. Julian Assange doesn't mess around with the emails. He's got 100% record for authenticity. Okay. So
and in the information that came out about the Twitter communications between WikiLeaks, Julian, and Roger Stone, you actually see Julian not necessarily not wanting Hillary to win, but showing and talking about the multiple different political camps that he was trying to support anyone, not support, but put information out relative to anyone trying to take down the global war machine. That's something that everything that Julian has done, whether it's exposing the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, the CIA with Vault 7, the Milton Report with the pollution. It was about limiting power and returning power to people, essentially. And the first thing that Julian tried to do was support Bernie Sanders. And the conversation that not try to support, but that's who the information supported. And what gets lost in the entire conversation between the Trump and the Hillary and the DNC information, especially in left-wing media and amongst liberals and progressives, is the fact that it was Bernie Sanders who didn't accept this information to fight and beat Hillary. That Bernie Sanders was the first person to not take a stand and say, this is corrupt, here is the information, let's do something about it, and allowed it to be given and allowed it to be used by Donald Trump, because the left-wing progressive element of the country didn't take this information as an issue and run with it, because their neoliberal masters that they still bow to in the mainstream media said, but if you do, it's Russia. So it was this really, even still looking back at that time, just as a person watching this information come out, going through the emails myself, and then not seeing the person who they most directly benefited take a stand on them, which was Bernie Sanders, was really like flabbergasting. because as all this information was coming out, he literally just stayed on his knees, so to speak.
Well, Andrew, you're right. I was really disappointed. Remember the time frame here. June 12, 2016, Julian Assange tells an interviewer that he has emails relating to Hillary Clinton pending publication, end quote. Whoa. When was the Democratic National Convention? 25 July it began. So that leaves from 12 June to 25 July. That leaves that much time for the DNC to figure out, oh, what are we going to do about that? Oh, my God. If he's got them, they'll show that we cheated Bernie Sanders out of the nomination. Oh, what are we going to do? And that's when they decided that they would pin it all on Russia, divert attention about the content of the emails onto Russia. Now, did Julian, when he finally published these things, and that was not until the 22nd of July, 2016, 3 days before the convention, did he intentionally want to support Sanders over Hillary? I think that's the wrong way to look at it. He had these emails. They showed that they were authentic. That's why it took him so long to vet them. And they showed what happened. What happened was that he was cheated out of the nomination. If Julian had emails on the other side from the Republicans, and he would have published them as well. I know that for a fact. I was with Julian 3 days before the election in the Ecuadorian embassy. He was completely washed out. Okay, he had given his last ounce of strength to get all the information that he had up and out. Okay, he had given an interview to John Pilger that morning, and John was going out to peddle that interview to the BBC, to Sky News, to Channel, and Julian had just gotten word that BBC said, no, thanks, but no thanks. Same with all the TV channels in London. No, we don't. Pilger said, I almost offered to pay them to run it, but now they're going to run it. And so I gave them to RT. Now, RT did run that interview, and that was good. But of course, for obvious reasons, Julian was a little bit depressed that nobody was interested in running this interview. But we sat down, we had a beer, and we talked for about an hour. And I could see that he was just really interested, not so much that Hillary would win or lose, but that he had done his job as a publisher. Okay. And so when I see all this other stuff going on, that he really had it in for Hillary, well, he didn't like Hillary. He made no bones about that. But this stuff was authentic. This was the real deal. And were he not to have published that, that would have been a misfeasance at least as a publisher. So that's the core of this. And the question as to how he got these things is coming into view now. The problem that I have is that the legend that has been established, namely that the Russians hacked, well, now we know they didn't. How do we know? We know from technical things, our own analysis, and we know from the head of the CrowdStrike forensics firm that was tasked by James Comey, this high-class entity, he called it, to do the forensics. They did the forensics, and now they say there's no evidence, no concrete evidence that the DNC emails were exfiltrated, read, hacked, okay? So now that's 3 months ago. As I mentioned, May 7th is when that testimony, which went back to December 5, 2017, was revealed to the public. Has the New York Times published that? No. Washington Post? No. Do any of your friends know about that? No. So as long as this media embargo on information like this is kept in place, people will never realize that it wasn't a hack by Russia or anybody else, that it was a leak. And that's where the neuralgia comes in, because if it was a leak, who leaked it? And suspicion falls on the only name we have, and that would be Seth Rich. So it's really bizarre, but not uncommon, given the milieu in which the mainstream media holds sway here in this country. And the notion that Julian Assange is going to be able to play some sort of role in this at this late date, because lawyers want him to, I think they're going through the motions. I'm virtually sure he's going to say, we don't discuss our sources, and then they will be back to square one, which is where they probably want to be.
And on an interesting side note too, about like how Julian had done this interview in regards to the emails coming out beforehand. It actually, in mid to late 2015, Kim.com did an interview with a New Zealand broadcasting station, where he actually said that in the 2016 election, Hillary Clinton's worst nightmare will be Julian Assange, and that he has the information and that it's already set. And so looking back at the evidence, it just shows, regardless of if it was Seth Rich, that there was someone inside there years, or at least a year before all of this happened, that was actually already getting ready to release information to WikiLeaks about what the DNC was doing. And so I think that that's a super important interview, because it's only about 2.5 minutes where Kim actually talks about what is coming, essentially. But it really sets the stage, and I feel like it was almost a shot across the bow to the would-be war criminals that were trying to steal the election. Because that's something else too that we talk about, that you bring up a whole lot, is in parallel to Russiagate is the Spygate scandal, which is major players at the Department of Justice and institutions thereunder that were systematically abusing their power. And you had talked about, I believe it was the last time you were on, Ray, that if this isn't brought to justice before the next presidential election, that we may be looking at a circumstance or situation where it's that level of spying on a presidential candidate or opponent is commonplace. So could you talk a little bit about that other side of the story too, and everything that kind of happened behind the scenes there?
Yes, I can. It pains me to do it, but the situation is roughly as follows. None of the establishment figures wanted Donald Trump to win. And of course, they felt that Hillary was absolutely the favorite and would win. That's why they dismissed the case against Hillary's abuse of the confidential, secret, and top secret emails that she kept on a private server. That was Peter Strzok led that investigation, so-called, and absolved her. Comey got up and said, "Yeah, she did terrible things, but at least I'm going to let her off." Now, what happened concurrently was they tried to do the opposite with respect to Trump. Peter Strzok, who was the second highest counterintelligence official at the FBI, had this conversation with his lover going on. She was a lawyer who worked in the deputy FBI director's office. Lisa Page was her name. And from those emails, you can see that the FBI was doing everything they could to make sure that Donald Trump won, and that, that Donald Trump would not win and that Hillary would. Now, I'm not making this up. James Comey wrote a book. And in that book, he says, quote, "I was operating in an environment in which we were sure that Hillary Rodham Clinton was to be the next president of the United States, period," end quote. Okay. Now, if you're operating in that environment, aren't you going to do everything you can to help her and to hurt her opponent? Well, if you're not quite as scrupulous as you, Andrew, and I are, yeah, that's what you do, okay? And are you afraid you're going to get caught? Who cares? Hillary's going to win. We'll get promoted. We'll get to be Secretary of Defense, for God's sake. We're not going to get indicted, okay? She's a sure thing. Now, when my friends ask me, Ray, are you telling me that the very top national security, law enforcement, intelligence officials of our government were playing fast and loose with the Constitution, with the rules, with the regulations, and so forth, trying to help Hillary and hurt Trump? I say, yeah, that's what I'm telling you. How can that be? And I say, what I just told you. She was sure to win. There was no reason to hesitate. As a matter of fact, they were so sure she was going to win that they didn't take the rudimentary steps to hide their tracks. So there's all kinds of information in computers and hard paper showing exactly what they did. Okay, now, who has that information? Bill Barr, Attorney General, and John Durham out there in Connecticut, the U.S. District Attorney that's charged with looking into the origins of Russiagate. So they have the stuff. They know how it went down. What are they going to do with it? That's the big question. Trump and Barr have said Trump's been spied on. Trump's been disadvantaged. They've named names: James Clapper, Comey, Brennan, Loretta Lynch, for God's sake, the Attorney General, and the other people who worked under Loretta Lynch, top officials. So they've named names. Now, what's going to happen? Well, Barr, most recently, about a month ago, said, well, the wheels of justice grind slow. We need time. And I hope by the end of the summer, maybe John Durham will say something. You know, I'm not a betting man, but I think they're going to chicken out. And I think the reason they're going to chicken out is because, as Senator Chuck Schumer told Rachel Maddow on January 3, 2016, it's very foolish to take on the intelligence community because, quote, they have 6 ways to Sunday to get back at you, end quote. 3rd of January, 2016, about 2 or 3 weeks before Trump became president. He was already president-elect. That's a warning that does not go unheeded. And so I think Trump is basically a coward. I think that he won't take these guys on, that people who are obviously guilty of forging things like that one lawyer, Kleinsmith, they'll go to jail maybe, or at least get indicted. But my guess, and I hope I'm wrong actually, is that the big fish, Clapper, Brennan, and Comey, that they'll be let off with a slap on the wrist, an investigation that said they didn't do everything they were supposed to do. So I hope that's not the case. But with each week that goes by, the election looming, number one, it's less likely that justice is going to be done. And number two, if they do come out with a report in late summer, it's going to look so political. It will look so election directed that it will be very easy to discredit it, whether it is accurate or not. And as I say, one has to have faith in at least John Durham to marshal the facts and come up with a synopsis of what really went down. Now, will he be permitted to do that? I'm guessing no. And I have precedent for that because he was the same guy appointed to look into CIA torturers that they had the book on. I mean, it was it was a no-brainer. And what did he do? Obama told him, and Holder, his attorney general, I'll lay off him. Just give him a slap on the wrist. And so that's what he did. So that's not a really optimistic lookout from my point of view, but we like to be kind of cold-minded here, and not let the wishes be fathers to thoughts. And that's how it looks right now. The news today, at least one report says John Brennan is not a target for the investigation, having just testified yesterday, I guess, to Durham. But even that is suspect. One doesn't know until Barr and Durham do their thing, and they better do it soon, or else it's not going to have the impact that it would otherwise have.
So one of the most interesting things in this entire situation to me is the irony of the Pied Piper email.
Of the Pied Piper?
The Pied Piper email. It came out in the Podesta emails, I believe, that the Hillary Clinton campaign had picked 3 different people. It was Donald Trump, Rand Paul, and Ted Cruz, I believe, to promote as the mainstream Republican. And the Podesta email showed how they essentially built a media coordination strategy to build Donald Trump up to look like the hero of the Republican Party. Literally, like not literally, but in so many words saying, let's make him daddy Republican so that way we can beat him because Hillary has the best chance to win against him. So like even their own fucking hubris, even their own decision of who to beat backfired against them so hard that it could land every single person involved in that situation for the rest of their life in federal prison or worse. But the person that they put in that position of power recognizes that it's up to them to maintain his position of power, because as soon as all of the elements of the mainstream media turn against him, his presidency's over. So I just think it's hilarious that Hillary Clinton built the monster that she then couldn't use the entirety of the U.S. intelligence establishment to beat. Like, to me, that just tickles that really dark spot inside of me of how stupid these people actually are.
Hilarious Hillary. A nice little alliteration there. Just a final comment on this whole thing. The spectacle that the head of weapons, or I'm sorry, terrorist research or whatever, under the Director for National Intelligence, now says that no matter who wins, whether it's Trump, whether it's Biden, they will all owe their election to either the Chinese or maybe the Russians or the Iranians, because they're all meddling one way or another, and we know about that. What has become of intelligence analysis? I mean, it's almost like a spoof, like something out of Gilbert and Sullivan, for God's sake. This is really, and of course, the Washington Post at least picked right up on it and said, oh, see, if so-and-so wins, because the Russians, because the Chinese, come, give me a break. What an insult that is to the intelligence of the American voter. And just the last thing on these Facebook things. When push came to shove and people did their homework and found out that these so-called Facebook ads that the Russian Internet Research Agency did before the last election, that many of them lasted after the election. Oh, isn't that interesting? And not only that, but during the pre-election period, the volume of these intrusions into the Facebook scenario amounted to, got a pencil? 0.000000 .00024% of the emails, or not the emails, of the Facebook items that Americans were exposed to. If I did that right, there were 8 zeros before 24, right? Now,
I'm pretty sure in science that's called statistically irrelevant, but I'm not positive. There may need to be 9 zeros before.
But people still think that was a big deal, okay? And people don't know that when Bob Mueller, in his wisdom, said Russia was responsible for that, namely that the Internet Research Agency was working for the Russian government for Putin. The Internet Research Agency hired some smart American lawyers and asked for discovery. Now, let's see what you got on us. And it turned out that the government lawyers were unable to connect the IRA with Russia. Now, Bob Mueller that's easy. Sure, you just say it, right? It was Russia. But in a court of law, details count, and there was no evidence that the government prosecutors, or defenders in this case, could adduce to show that it was a Russian government agency. And so what happened? Department of Justice threw out the case. They gave up. So all this stuff is known to people like you and me, Andrew. Our task, as I see it, our challenge really, is to find some smart way to get it out among Americans who are really interested, Americans who should be interested, Americans who are impoverished on the diet they get from the New York Times.
I think the larger problem isn't the Americans that are reading the New York Times. It's the Americans that don't interact or engage with any type of media at all, aside from like video games and TV shows and things like that. Because there's a much larger portion of the population that understands everything happening right now is bullshit, but don't really care to get involved. So I wanna try to find a way to reach the New York Times readers as well as the people that don't read anything. Because I think if you can find a way to bridge that gap to make the apolitical care as much as the political class, so to speak, about issues, then you can really start to create this fundamental change.
I hope we can do that. That's clearly what the task is.
But I would like to thank you very much, Mr. McGovern, for joining us. It is always a pleasure to have you on. If you could, please let people know about your wonderful website and where else they can find you on social media.
Sure. The website is raymcgovern.com. Twitter @RayMcGovern. I publish first and foremost on consortiumnews.com, which I think is the best website, founded 25 years ago by Bob Perry. And I also publish on antiwar.com, which is also a terrific resource, opednews.com. But if you want not only my writings, but my speeches and some other things, raymcgovern.com winds up with all of them. And my son is very, very angry with me. He's my webmaster, and he's angry if I don't mention this our website in such conversations. So he's not going to get angry with me this time. He says, always, Ray, always, Dad, say raymcgovern.com. If you don't get it, you don't get it. So there I said it.
Well, I'd like to thank you very, very, very much again for joining us. My name's Andrew Smith. You can find me on Twitter @Andrew Zigman. The other co-host that joined us earlier was Steve Poikinen. He did have to step away for some family business, but you can find him on YouTube at Slow News Day Show.
Podcast.
You can also
Slow News Day Podcast.
Slow News Day Podcast, and on Twitter as well. You can find us at action_4 Assange and actionforassange.com. And I just want to again say thank you to everyone behind the scenes that's helping out with the DC protests and making these vigils happen. And with that, good luck to us all.
Good luck.